Well, it's harvest season now, and today I'd like to talk about walnuts, specifically uh, dealing with the husks of walnuts and also extracting the shell from the husk and toxicity of the husks and toxicity of walnuts in general, medicinal properties, all that sort of thing concerning the walnut family, juglans. Um, so there's basically two major types of walnuts that are grown commercially. Um, the Most people think of walnuts, when they think of walnuts, they're thinking of this nut. In the United States, this is called the English walnut. This is the only country in the world where it's called English walnut. It's not called English walnut in England. They don't grow walnuts commercially in England, for one thing. Um, and the center of origin of the walnut is of this type of walnut, Juglans regia, um, is Central Asia. So they're native to Kyrgyzstan, um, Iran, ancient Persia, so a more and up into Central Asia, up into the mountains as far as Poland, the Carpathian Mountains. So this is not something that is called English walnut for any reason other than the fact that in the United States we have the native black walnut. The black walnut is native to half of the United States, and to avoid confusion between the two, in the United States these are called English walnuts, I think probably because they were brought to the United States in English ships in the 1700s. They were probably grown in Spain or southern France. But it was English ships that brought them here, and so to distinguish them, they call them English walnuts. But as I say, they're not grown in England. It's kind of confusing. But the black walnut is notorious for having a husk that completely covers the nut. And this is what the black walnut looks like when it's off the tree. And this is what it looks like when it's cleaned. And the husk has to be mechanically removed from the black walnut. It will never remove itself. Whereas with the Persian walnut, we're going to call it Persian walnut, not English walnut from now on. With the Persian walnut, the husk kind of degrades and on its own, and the husk will separate from the shell if certain things are not present. Certain things that would cause the husk to adhere to the shell would be bacterial blight, and another thing that would cause the husk to adhere to the shell would be a worm, specifically codling moth or walnut husk fly. These are insects that lay their eggs in the husks, and these little worms, these little white worms, don't get into the shell. They feed in the husk itself, and then their life cycle is such that in the fall, when the nuts fall to the ground, they at some point they will pupate into the soil for reemergence the following summer. And so if these worms are present in the husk, then it will cause the husk of the Persian walnut to adhere to the shell. But if the worms are not present in the husk, and if there's no bacterial blight, then which also can cause the husk to darken and adhere to the shell, if neither of those things are present, then the nuts will generally fall free, just like this, from the husk on their own. This applies to the Persian walnut, not the black walnuts. So bacterial blight is primarily a problem in regions of high humidity. In the irrigated deserts where walnuts are commercially grown quite often, like in the Sacramento Valley of California, that's not a real big issue there because it's so dry. but in humid areas, bacterial blight can be a problem and necessitate the means of mechanical husking of the husk to separate it from the shell, such as what always has to be done with the black walnut. And so that can be done by one of several means. In the case of black walnuts have such an incredibly hard shell that there are industrial uses for the shell, like sandpaper. You know, it's that hard. At any rate, so oftentimes people will collect black walnuts in a driveway and drive over them, and just driving over them will crush a few of the nuts, but it'll often just knock the husk off and shoot the nut out a little ways. But that can be a very messy prospect if you have a concrete driveway that you don't want to have stained dark brown, because the walnut husks are notorious stainers, which is why I'm wearing gloves right now. On old homesteads, one of the means of mechanically removing the husks from black walnuts is an old-fashioned corn husker, which is a cast iron device that you would bolt to a table, and you'd put an ear of corn, dried corn, into the top of this cast iron device, and it has a crank, and you just feed the corn kernel into the aperture at the top and turn the crank, and it would knock all the dried kernels off the cob. And it'll do the same with black walnuts. That's what they did 100 years ago. Now there are other ways of removing the husks. If you have a cement mixer, for example, just throwing a bunch of nuts with a little bit of gravel into a cement mixer, the tumbling action will clean them quite nicely. Or if you just have a few to deal with, you can allow them to get soft. If the nuts get soft, if they darken like this, they're a lot easier to physically remove. Like you could take a wire brush, for example, and just brush it off, the husk from the shell. A contrivance like this, where we've got a metal screen, where you can put several layers of nuts in this, and then put a screen on the top like that, and then take a pressure washer ideally and just go back and forth, so the screening is sufficiently large that the husk debris will pass through it, but it's small enough to keep the shells inside. This is actually a screen device for the smaller Heartnuts, which are a much smaller nut, the Japanese walnut, which has a heart-shaped shell when it's removed from the husk. For the larger nuts, a larger screen aperture, more like chicken wire even, might be more appropriate. This could also be designed as a cylinder, a cylinder mounted with an axle and a crank, and with just an opening of the cylinder to put the nuts in, and then you can apply a pressure washer or a hose with a spray nozzle that's real tight, so you have a lot of pressure to remove that husk and clean them up. Now, walnuts that you buy in the grocery store often look a little cleaner than what you'll get just doing all this if you have to remove the husk from an English walnut. Walnuts in the grocery stores have generally, in addition to the husk removal, if necessary, they've also been bleached. The surface has been bleached, and that can make them brighter and cleaner looking. You want to make sure that they're very well sealed nuts, otherwise it's going to compromise the kernel quality, the flavor, and also it can shorten the storage life of the nuts in the shell when they're bleached. So it's really just a cosmetic thing as far as bleaching is concerned. So with other nuts that have this issue of the necessity of husk removal include the butternuts, which are also native to the United States and Eastern Canada, and exclusively native to North America. and they have a very thick shell that's pretty convoluted, so they take a little more effort to get them to this point of cleanliness with the spraying. And also the Heartnuts. The Heartnuts are a smaller nut and are most easily cleaned, much more so than easier than say black walnuts or butternuts. But they also have a smooth shell, and that makes them easier to clean. And their husks are thinner typically, and the shells are thinner also, and so too much intense pressure washing can sometimes actually split the nuts. So you want to go a little lighter with Heartnuts if you're cleaning Heartnuts. So another issue with the husks, I mentioned about basically about the staining aspect of them. So which is why you want to wear gloves. Now, when the nuts are real green like this black walnut, they're not going to stain anything. But as soon as they start to darken, they're an excellent dye plant. In fact, every year people will contact us and request some walnuts in the husks for dyeing fabrics and such, or dealing with scuff marks on furniture or something like that, because the black walnut makes a dark brown, like a chocolate brown dye. The butternuts, they're more of a little lighter brown, kind of a yellowish brown. I guess that was a name for rebel soldiers, Confederates in the Civil War, was butternuts, in part because many of the regiments dyed their uniforms with the butternut husks. At any rate, so that's something that you want to be careful, be aware of, is the staining aspect. But there's also a medicinal aspect to the husks. The husks have been traditionally often just taken and soaked in alcohol to make a tincture, and apparently that's just small doses of the tincture are pretty effective in killing internal parasites in animals or people. Now, the husks of several different kinds of nuts are also eaten, but not in the mature stage, but as soon as the nuts start to size up in summer, in midsummer, is when the nuts are utilized. Persian or walnuts are used in parts of Europe and in Central Asia as kind of like a vegetable when they're just sizing up, but before they get hard. So in other words, if you can stick a pin through the husk when it's first reached size, right through the husk and shell and all, then that indicates that it's still soft enough to be utilized as a food. And I know traditionally they're often pickled. I guess almonds are also used like that, where you can eat the whole husk, shell and all, when they first size up, but before they get hard. I know in parts of Europe, walnut husks are also harvested and mixed with alcohol and spices and syrups to make nocciola. Is that correct, Ben?
Nocino.
Nocino, thank you. Yeah. Nocino, alcoholic beverage. So anyway, so in addition to all that, there are the toxic effects of husks, which I mentioned, killing internal parasites, but also there's another aspect to walnuts in general, that they have a reputation of being toxic to other plants around them. Now, I guess I would like to dispel that to some extent, at any rate, based on our own experience here. So, like, I'm sitting under a heartnut tree here, and behind us is a forest of bamboo, and so they certainly seem to be compatible, and it's why don't we walk around a bit, and I can show you some other visual illustrations of trees and shrubs and forbs growing in combination with walnut trees with no apparent ill effects. Now the literature has often repeated that, you know, this notion where walnut trees can kill all kinds of things growing around them. And so based on my 44 years of experience in growing them, I'd like to somewhat counter that assertion. Here's the walnut, the Japanese walnut, and here's a pear tree. I harvested the pear the other day. Looks like I missed a couple, but okay, so the branches are almost touching. You know, typically it's said that the roots of plants, of trees rather, generally extends about twice the width of the visual canopy. So, and you know, I've corroborated that just by digging holes a long ways away from a tree, and I'll see, you know, walnut roots. So, so anyway, no issues with this pear tree here, or this quince tree here, or the Shipova tree there, or the plum trees here, or the fir tree here. Walnut, Persian walnut orchard, Persian walnuts there, chestnut there, chestnut here. So the walnuts and the chestnuts are touching branches. The walnut tree, very happy. And there's also oaks back here. Oaks, very happy with the oaks. So here we've got walnuts with hazelnuts and cascara trees and the wild crab apples all growing together. Here walnuts, Juglans regia, the Persian walnut right next to chestnuts. And here we have an understory of serviceberry and hazelnut underneath walnuts, thimbleberries. So here we're next to black walnut, Juglans nigra, which has the reputation of being the most toxic to other plants. You can see the persimmon here, I'm sorry, the mulberry tree growing underneath it, as well as lots of healthy grasses and blackberries. And of course we're right next to a whole field of blueberries. And the black walnut roots go way out into this field. So I know that there's no incompatibility issues with these. So where does this reputation of toxicity come from? Well, in the literature I've seen it's mostly referring to specifically to tomatoes, potatoes, and alfalfa. So now, of course, none of those is, you know, that shade tolerant, and but juglone, the toxic element in walnuts, is found in the leaves and the husks, as well as the roots to varying degrees, but I think it's probably most concentrated in the leaves and the husks. So I would expect that if you were to mulch a tomato plant or a potato plant with walnut husks, that you'd probably see toxicity, you know, in that tomato plant as a result of the concentration of the juglone substance in the husk and the leaves. But I think just growing in proximity, as long as those plants are still getting sun, I expect they'd, for most plants anyway, there doesn't seem to be a toxic effect based on our 44 years of growing a lot of plants in association with them. Once walnuts are dry, are cleaned, they need to be dried. So, you know, they can be put in front of a fan. We use these plastic crates with slots on the sides and the bottoms, that provide good airflow. But you want to get them as dry as quickly as possible so they don't start to mold. In fact, you want to harvest them as quickly as possible. You know, the longer they stay on the ground, the more likely the kernels will turn darker and achieve a bit of an off flavor. with walnuts in general, and probably with most nuts actually, the natural oils in the nuts that are very beneficial um, to the human body can go rancid at high temperatures. So ideally you'd want to dry them at below 115 degrees Fahrenheit, slowly to ensure that the nuts keep much longer than they would if they're dried at a high temperature, um, such as an oven. So and one way of gauging when a nut is ripe is when it loses that rubbery texture and can snap easily. Like in the case of the Persian walnuts, the papery divide in that divides the two halves of the walnut should be able to snap rather than bending. That would be a good indication of ripeness.